You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. If you'd like to find out more about that path, then go to primalhappiness.co/go deeper. And now onto this week's show. It's with Sian Marie Pilkington, a woman of wordcraft, mother to four, deep-rooted energy worker, herbalist, birth attendant, retreat facilitator, and a community creator. In this week's show, Sian and I talked about rewilding pregnancy. Oh, I just love that description. I really do. And we talked about why this is what our culture needs right now, and what it means on an individual and practical level for a woman wanting to walk this sacred path. I found this a deeply healing and inspiring episode, despite having left the pregnancy stage of my own life. I really think this is something all of us would benefit from listening to, whatever stage of life we're in. Let's dive in. Hello, Sian. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, very, very welcome. I feel like this episode started out as kind of really a favour for a friend, and then a combination of getting to know you and seeing your work. I've just like, oh, this is someone I'm actually really glad I've got to know myself. And then the brief conversation we've had before we started recording, I'm like, do you know what? I'm not planning to have any more pregnancies myself, but this feels like something I really want to know about too. And I had no idea that I'd want to until we started talking. So I'm actually thrilled in a way that I didn't expect to be. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm excited.
So we were talking about, I guess, even like what to call this topic. And I was kind of sort of floundering around, coming up with all these different terms. And then you just said this beautiful line about rewilding your pregnancy. And when you said it, I was just like, yes, of course. And that we're so about that. You're so about that, of course. So how did you get into this work of wild pregnancy, rewilding your pregnancy? Like, what led you here?
Okay, well, first and foremost, I did not go looking for this work. It completely came and found me. And it was disconcerting, to say the least. I just moved to Canada about 2 years before, when I just found out I was pregnant with my second the day before we moved. And at that point in my life, I was a very unconscious woman. In fact, with my first pregnancy, I didn't even know that I was pregnant for 20 weeks.
Wow.
I was extremely disconnected from my body. I had been abusing it with all sorts of things, including eating disorders since my teenage years. And I was in a very patriarchally led mode. I was in marketing and sales post my media and English degree. And I was always balls to the walls. And it was always for me about keeping up with the men. And even when pregnant with my first child, like forcing these big milky breasts into a white starched shirt so I could get to work, and hiding away my breast pump and feeling shame around this feminine aspect of myself, that when I was at home, I was in my essence. So when pregnant with my third baby in 2012, I had been on a journey with a shaman friend who had taken me under her wing when I moved here, of just kind of awakening to myself a little bit. And I'd been through my Saturn return. And I was very slowly but surely kind of peeking out from this person that I'd been hiding in, this shell that I'd been hiding in, that was all about perfection and keeping up and protection. And I was sitting on her sofa, another Brit, having a cup of tea, and literally out of nowhere, there was a very, very solid voice that said to me, "Be a doula." And I'd never had anything like that.
Oh my goodness.
My friend was sitting opposite me, and this came to me, and nothing had ever happened to me like that since I was a little girl, when I would get like clear downloads then. And like most of us, we just kind of shut ourselves off from it, right? So I paid attention because I had written an article on a doula the year before, and she was my method of getting in with the midwives when I moved here, which was important to me. So I didn't even hesitate. I kind of like, it shook me for a minute, the clarity of this voice. But I went home and I signed up for this doula course, and I took it. And I began attending births when I was 6 months pregnant, and attended them all the way through to 3 weeks before I gave birth, which I wouldn't really suggest anybody does. It was trial by fire for me, and it opened my eyes to the to the holiness of birth, because I'd given birth prior. But when you're in an altered state of consciousness, when you're in Delta, when you're giving birth, you're not as aware of the things around you. You're really in your own zone. And for me, all of a sudden, my spiritual kind of channel mode came in when I began to do birth work, and I was able to really see the holiness in it. And I was also able to differentiate between what a wild birth is and what a birth in captivity is, to quote Emily Saldaya, who is the owner of a free birth society. I'd only ever given birth in the water with midwives because I was a young girl who had been lucky to be with midwives who suggested it. So I had always given birth in an undisturbed manner. And then to suddenly be in birth work and see women in captivity, being held and legs apart, degraded and abused actually sometimes, it was such an eye-opener. And then I felt the first time that I've ever felt it in my life, a little activist come up in me. It's the only thing that's ever raised that activist essence in me. It's not who I am by nature, but that I understood that my birth work was not going to be simply about witnessing women give birth or hip squeezes. It was going to be about turning this around and educating around the way that it can be, right? So that was what brought me to it. It was not because I had any traumatic birth experiences myself, which I think is what brings many people to it.
Yes.
It was because I saw that there was a need for some healing in the birth culture. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And just going back to that moment, like, I just love the magic of that, where you just realized that was your path. Had you had any prior thoughts that that's what you wanted to do? Had you had a sense of that? It really was out of the blue.
Really was, not at all. When I had birthed my children, I felt very powerful and proud, I guess, but also just kind of got on with life very quickly afterwards. I wasn't seeing the sanctity of birth. I was grateful that I'd had the attendance that I'd had, but no, it wasn't in my mindscape. And I always was going to be a writer since I was teeny tiny, so it was not on my radar. And also, it was really hard for my family for many years. So that was why I make a point of saying that I didn't choose this. If I could have stepped out of birth work, I would have done many times, because it caused some rifts between my husband and I, and leaving children to go attend births and stuff was not always easy. But ultimately, I didn't honestly feel like there was a real choice. It was just, this is what I have to do.
Wow.
And so it has integrated really well into my life now, but I've been a doula now for almost 8 years, and it took 5 of those for everybody to understand that this was, I didn't think of it before and I didn't choose it. It chose me.
Wow. Oh, I love that. I love that. It's always something so special when people have either experience where from very young they've known what they want to do, or like you just have that kind of moment of clarity. Just love those stories. Yeah. So when we were talking before, you gave this really beautiful description, I guess, of wild pregnancy. We'll certainly like deepen into that, but would you just kind of like in a nutshell, just give us that kind of sense of like when you're talking about wild pregnancy, how would you define this?
So with wild pregnancy, there's a real connection to our innate knowing and our innate wisdom and our innate strength. And there are a few things that get in the way of that. There is trauma that's in your cells from wombs that we've come from, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother. And there is what we've been told. We only know what we've been told. And in the generations that we've been brought up in, we've been told that women need help to give birth. And so it's taken the wildness out because everything has been managed. Everything's become managed. Even the natural hormonal cocktail of birth has started to become disrupted because we've disturbed it so much. So a wild pregnancy to me is when we are able to connect with the land, when we're through herbs, through plant medicine, through whatever means that might be for you, when we're able to tap into our own wisdom without noise, when we're able to shut out the noise, and when we're able to self-care. So there's a woman who I absolutely adore. Her name is Sarah Durham Wilson, and she talks a lot about the maiden to mother journey. And she's been one of my biggest teachers. And she says, she has this beautiful phrase that the mother contains the other. And when you have a wild pregnancy, the mother is able to contain everything. She can contain the things that are coming up, the things that are being excavated, the traumas. She's able to move into the places that she needs to heal them. She's able to tap into her body and figure out what doesn't feel right. What do I need to tend to? And when it comes time for birth, she's able to be very quiet and listen to the whispers that her body is telling her that the baby is ready. And they work symbiotically. So for me, a rewilded pregnancy and birth is about hushing all the noise around you and self-managing, self-caring, self-tending. And with that comes choosing very specifically who you choose to witness you, that you are not being managed or told what to do by anybody, and that the people that you choose to be in the room, they are holding a privilege that you've gifted to them. So there is a lot about how to make this wild, but really it's just about getting back to the basics. They say that the root of the word radical is to go back to the root. Like the etymology is to go back to the root. So people think that a radical person, for example, somebody that free births without caregivers, is a bad thing, that they're crazy, that they've gone off and done their own weird thing, right? When actually they just went back to their roots. All they did was went back to the base and then they built on there. So yeah.
Oh gosh, I love that. Something, I'd never seen this before, but when you're talking about the time of pregnancy being, it's almost like when the veils are thin and a woman is more sensitive, can hear more of her own intuition and wisdom. I was thinking, oh yes, that reminds me of both when we are in our bleed of our menstrual cycle and also in menopause. And both those times are sort of spoken about as a time of sensitivity and an opportunity to listen. I was like, oh wow, I'm a bit embarrassed actually even to say this, I've never realized, like, of course, pregnancy is another one of those.
Absolutely.
Wow.
It's when we're going down into those very altered states of consciousness, the very, very slow brain waves, and we're in delta. I mean, you're in a dreamland and you're in a different space of consciousness. My eldest daughter is on the precipice of a menarche, and I see it around her. It's like she's walking in this like it's not unconscious, it's very conscious, but this dream-like state. And when we ask her silly questions that have no relevance in her altered state, she gets frustrated. And you see that with women when they're birthing, when they're in this very quiet space and somebody says, "Are you having another contraction?" Or is it coming? It's very frustrating for her because these are not questions that are relevant in her world right now. She just needs to be with that space that she's in, because the veils are thin. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. You just remind me, actually, my friend who's pregnant at the moment, that kind of inspired this whole thing. She was over the weekend, and she was saying her dreams at the moment are like crazy, like off the charts crazy. Yeah. Oh, wow. So where should we start? I think what really triggered my curiosity just now was when you were talking about that connection with the land and plant medicines, or finding a way that makes sense to have that connection with the land. Would you talk a bit more about that? Because
Sure.
I didn't expect you to say that. And so I was just really interesting.
Well, again, going back to what we were saying about how we only know what we're told, right? Modern society tells us that when we're pregnant that we have to know all the things, just know all the things. And I know for sure that when I was pregnant with my first, I just couldn't read enough. And there are certain, I understand it. It's part of the nesting process. It's not all about cleaning your cupboards when you're nesting. You have to kind of feel like you're armed with something. But there's only so much wisdom that we can take in. And I think getting back to nature is a way to integrate any knowledge that we've brought in through studying. And we also have to filter out the stories of others, because everybody's birth story is coming in with its own spin. And there is so much birth trauma prevalent in our culture now that, can you see me still? Yeah.
Yes.
There's so much birth trauma prevalent that we need to have a way to filter out what is not ours, so that it doesn't interfere with what we're trying to bring through with the child that we're trying to bring through. So going back to nature, going out in the forest, walking in the woods, taking in plant medicine in the form of herbal infusions. There's a herbalist called Susan Weed who talks about nourishing herbal infusions. And there's and Janine Pavati Baker is also a wonderful herbalist who is also a midwife. They speak in depth about how the plant wisdom gets into the body. So I really like to think about herbs in terms of not just the nutrient quality that they're bringing in, but the essence that they're bringing in. So nettle, for example, in an infusion will bring in lots of iron. It's a very good blood builder, which is great for pregnancy and post-birth. But it also is a herb that's derives from Mars. Mars is its ruling planet. So with that, you get like a warrioress spirit. So if you're somebody that's very fearful about birth, taking in that plant medicine is going to create a greater sense of confidence. And red raspberry leaves are a wonderful uterine toner. So they're going to bring in this essence of strength to the womb, obviously physiologically, but they also have a very tender nature to them. But they also have a slight bitterness. So it makes you sharper to the sensations in your body, right? So connection with nature can come in so many ways, but for me, it's a filtration and a medicine, like a greater whispering of natural medicine.
Oh, I love that. So if, as someone listening, how would you tell them to kind of take a step in that direction? If they're hearing, oh, yes, I'd really love to connect more with the land in that way. What would you suggest would be a kind of, the big fear that I think we all have is like, oh my goodness, you're pregnant. You can't risk having something that's going to how would you suggest a woman who's listening and is pregnant would embark on that path?
Okay, so I would go for a book to begin with that's very thin, but it tells you a lot. And it's called Herbal for the Childbearing Year, and it's with Susan Weed. That will give you a basis, because I hear what you're saying. People are worried about what they're taking into their body. So this gives you a very good rundown of the things that are medicine for your body when you're pregnant and how they help you. So that would be a starting point. But I don't think you're ever going to connect with anything as well as going right there with it. So I think going off to the woods and taking the time when you can just to sit in the space with plants. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a plant that you're going to take into your body, just to be around the wisdom of that. There's such a rootedness in the forest. There's all those root systems that connect and communicate with one another. And as pregnant women, that's where we're at. We are a community, a global community of women that can communicate to one another, right? And the more that we raise the consciousness around pregnancy and birth, the more that will be communicated and will become a reality, so that we can continue to rewild this. So I literally think that being in the forest and not worrying about preparing anything, taking anything, just being with it is it's one of the best ways to ground yourself. Women can be so much in their heads in pregnancy that we need a way to ground into our body and feel embodied in who and what we are practicing, preaching, and wanting to bring into our lives.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think everything you just said is so applicable to all of us. And I can also see why specifically in pregnancy. And I think there is this, again, with the domesticated culture we're in, I think we're potentially even less likely to go and connect with the wild when pregnant, because we sort of think, oh, we have to be, wrapped in cotton wool and keep safe and regulated. And I love the kind of invitation and permission you're giving. Like, no, this is actually the best time to go and connect. Yeah.
Like for me, one of the biggest epidemics that I see in birth and postpartum actually is that we're infantilizing women. We're making women into children and trying to mollycoddle and feed them everything the whole way. What happens when we do this with pregnant and birthing women is that when they come into motherhood, they don't know where to start. They have no confidence in that essence. So that's not to say you have to go completely in it alone and never ask a piece of advice. Women have had aunties and sisters and grandmothers and friends around them since time immemorial, right? We can always reach out and ask the places that we need to ask. But I think that we need to quit force feeding women with our own stories, ideas, programs. And as pregnant women, we need to start looking outside of that box and realizing that we're grown people. We had the capability to have a soul call down into our body, contain it, grow it, nurture it. There was something special about us. And it doesn't mean, for me, that's a big initiation all by itself. And we continue, we don't need to keep disrupting the initiation process.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I really hear what you're saying about that infantilization. I can't say the word clearly, but I hear you. Yeah, so true. I've not actually seen it through that lens before, but I can really see it's almost like a misguided kind of nurture and compassion, but it goes so far that it's actually taking a woman out of any sort of sense of trust in herself, her own sovereignty.
Yes.
And I think that's a really good thing to kind of bring into the conversation. Okay, that's wonderful. So looking at the other aspects of wild pregnancy, where should we go next?
Are we looking at pregnancy or birth?
Oh, let's do it in a nice order. So is there anything else you'd say on pregnancy before we get to birth?
I think that there's some ritual and ceremony that we can do around pregnancy. So I really, I know in England now it's getting to be a bigger craze to have baby showers, right? And they're super fun. Who doesn't want to get a little bit glammed up and have their friends around them and get some gifts? It's super cute. But I offer something called a mother blessing ceremony, which is not something that I created.
Is this the same or similar to... I think I heard it described as a blessing way. Is it?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't use the word blessing way because that actually belongs to a different tradition, an indigenous tradition, and it's kind of borrowed word, but it is what people mean. But I choose not to use it because I don't want to appropriate. So this is a mother blessing, and what the mother blessing is it's a deep, deep celebration of the woman that is just stepping out from one portion of her life into the next, and it is such a rich experience. I had one with my fourth, and it continues to be one of my favorite memories of all time still, because I've never in my life felt so sovereign, autonomous, beautiful, guided, still held, celebrated. There was a feast. It's beautiful. So the mother blessing looks often like you can wrist wrap, you can use red string to tie all the women into circle with the matrilineal line. So you're bringing in all your ancestors and all of the maternal wealth of knowledge, right, from the ethers. And then there may be a bead ceremony where a bead is offered from each person with a prayer to the woman of what they wish for her. And you can make prayer flags, and you can brush her hair and wash her feet and massage her belly and adorn her and anoint her with oils and bring her food for her freezer for afterwards, which is a practical gift that's necessary. That woman is going to need that more than a pair of baby booties, right? She's going to need the stew in the oven after she's given birth. And it's a way for women to gather and help her to say goodbye to a piece of her life that is going to be gone for good. And bring her into this, like walk her through this rite of passage. And when I When women do this, I do see them walk into their births more often, feeling more grounded and more like, well, okay, so that's done. I've walked to this cliff edge. I can either step over the edge or I can move back. And I see women move back and forth and back and forth. And when they're fully supported and they know that they have their people behind them, I feel like they can tip over the edge into birth with more confidence. Mm-hmm. So ceremonially, I think to do something to say goodbye to the maiden or the mother of one or two or three or whatever it is and move forward is important and beautiful.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much. It's I'd heard of the term from a client who's recently given birth, and I thought then, I'd already mentioned to my friend Emma, who's pregnant now, that I was thinking of doing something like this. This is like really just totally kind of like, oh yes, we definitely need to create that for Emma. And there was part of me, it's like, I wish I'd had that when I was pregnant. I can see the power in it, really do. And also I'm a huge advocate of ritual and ceremony, but I think particularly when they are rite of passage, where there is that kind of letting go and even grieving what was and to create space for what's to come, I can so see why that's powerful.
Yeah. I think that the more that we do ceremony around any specific rite of passage, the more that we open it up to everything. I mean, in an ideal world, we would be doing a ceremony for the girl's first bleed, which is a very similar process to this. And then we would do the pregnancy, and then we would do a closing of the bones after birth, and then you would do a croning ceremony. That women are not being celebrated. And then when we're not seen in our rites of passage and in our transformation, a lot of the time the resentment comes in, right? And the stuckness, like we cling to the past portion of our lives because there was no severance from it with ceremony. So and I want to say to anybody that's listening to this, if they do want to do a mother blessing, it really doesn't have to be super fancy. You can make it as fancy as you want, but really at its essence, all it is bringing your favorite, most trusted people to you to support you as you move forward. And it can look like anything, right? Yeah,
I really heard that. It's like I suspect having a baby shower is probably better than nothing. But what I really heard in the description of what you were talking about with the mother's blessing was just the real heart that's there, the real connection, the present tension. Yeah. So yes, I think you bring that, it's going to be good. Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything that's like right. Gorgeous. So are we ready to go give birth now?
So we're talking about wild birth, right?
Yes.
Okay. So for me, I think one of the biggest things is who we bring to our birth space. You want to have the people in your birth space who you don't feel would ever be taking out of your energy. So there's a lot of hormones going on in the duration of birth, and there are some things that we require as primal animals. There are some things that we desperately require in order to move through the process with some ease, and one of those is darkness. We're not created to give birth with light shining down on us. It doesn't feed into our sense of safety or privacy. On the privacy topic, it doesn't feed into our sense of safety and privacy to have a ton of people watching us as we lay down, as we get ready to release this child. So darkness, privacy, quiet, respect, not having people ordering and barking things at you. So this is why choosing your birthing companions is really important. And for some people, it's nobody. And for some, you need some people. But just being mindful of who it is, and that you are always in control of this, that you're not obliged to have anybody. At my first birth, I didn't expect me to have a 3-hour birth, but that was the way it was. And my mother was desperate to be with me, but I was going to a birth center and I just knew, as much as I love her, I couldn't have her there. And I sent her home, and I was really glad because things picked up very, very fast, and I almost felt like birth was happening to me. And had I had somebody in that space that I didn't want, it would have been my senses were so heightened, it would have been out of control. It would have been too much. for me to try and filter out somebody's presence. And I see that a lot of times, that women feel obliged to have a sister or a mother or something in their birth space, and it disrupts the natural pattern and the natural rhythm. Likewise, sometimes women don't have their mothers around anymore. They've passed away or they're far away, and it's disruptive to them because that presence isn't there. So tap in so clearly who makes me safe. When I'm in my concentric circle and when I'm in the very center of this birthing journey in this room, and I'm about to birth a light into the world, who is only going to pour inwards to me? Who's going to surround me and just keep that space safe and protected and hold it? And if there is anybody in that room that's like, oh, what's happening? Or let me get closer. Or you do this, put your leg up, do this. They're taking away from your juju. They're moving it outward.
That makes so much sense. I didn't so much have, my whole experience with my first was pretty much a disaster. So it's kind of one of those ones, it's really hard to piece together the bits that I chose versus just kind of went their own way. But I know one of my friends spoke, she had quite a traumatic birth with her first. And she realized only afterwards, she said, I'm sure a huge part of that was choosing to have my mum there. And her mum's lovely. It wasn't intentional, but she did very much feel that she put pressure on and took away. And that's really stood out. She wasn't at the time, really, conscious. No way was it a wild pregnancy, but she knew afterwards that was what made the difference to her. So I really,
there's a little bit more to be said about that. I think maybe there is a little bit more that I think I can touch on with that just for a minute about how having mothers there can be detrimental sometimes.
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
Because I think it's almost like there's probably two people that are often almost seen as the default, either a mother or a partner. And so I think it's really helpful to talk to both. It could be, as you're saying, neither are right. So I'd love to hear more on that.
So we, again, societally, we're being kept in our maiden. We're not able to extract ourselves from our maiden because everything is telling us that the maiden is most desirable, right? You have to be younger. You have to even, people are even using higher voices. We go into the birth room and we are this powerful entity that has force moving through it. But yet we have a mother in the room and our maiden so desperately wants to be held in her lap. And it so desperately wants to make her happy and please her. Maybe she had a traumatic birth that we want to be the savior of, or maybe she had a very simple birth and we want to replicate it. But we have all of this expectation that we're putting on ourselves in our maiden when we're walking into mother in our birthing scene. And so there's a separation, right? Just like the child needs to make its severance from its mother's bed and from its mother's breast. And when the teenager acts up because she needs to make a severance from her mother, it's another time when she needs to make a severance from her mother. And so I've seen women be with their mothers at birth, and it's been a stunning experience. But I've witnessed them very often in their child. That rather than stepping fully into their power and roaring this child out and bearing down and doing this work, they've had their hair braided or they've been stroked, and and there's nothing wrong with that. It's lovely. It's a beautiful thing to witness this, but I feel like it can cause a bit of a disconnect sometimes in the process. So I really don't want to put shame on anybody's experience here. And if you had your mother there, I think that's one of the most beautiful things that I've ever seen sometimes. But I also don't want anybody to feel shame around this intrinsic knowing that they have, that they don't want their mother present at the birth. And if that happened to you, if that happened where she was there, I think we can trust that there was lessons learned in that experience. But maybe this gives you some perspective around what may have been happening.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's such wisdom. Really, really do. And I think again it goes back to this domesticated way that we're holding pregnancy, where there's almost these kind of well, of course, if you get on with your mother, of course you'd want your mother there. And I think again, just that freedom to tune in to really what will serve, really what you desire.
Yes.
So needed. Yes. Okay. So and also I was just thinking, gosh, that whole thing around dark and privacy, and like just the opposite to hospital, like most hospitals, like just so starkly different.
Yeah.
I heard you say something earlier about, that choice between, hospital, and obviously there's varying types of kind of hospital births in centres and things like that, or home birth. And you said you didn't use the word, but there's kind of consequences, I can't think of a better word, that come with either. Would you talk about that? Because I think that's helpful to know. Like, that's true in anything in life, isn't there? There's rarely going to be a right decision. It's understanding everything that comes with either and then making the choice from there.
For sure. So for many years, I bit my tongue and kind of sat on my hands around this conversation because it's triggering for people, right? But I don't really believe in trigger points anymore. I think it's just raising what we need to raise. I don't believe that birth belongs in hospital. I just don't. From everything that I've seen, learned, witnessed, experienced, I don't believe it does. And that's not to say there are not times where it needs to be transferred there, or that there aren't things that do need to be managed there. Sometimes that is the case, but not to the level that we think that we're told.
Not as the default, yeah.
No. So when we're giving birth, as I was saying before, we're going down through the different levels of consciousness. My teacher, Wapio, talks a lot about this. And you're going into this space where outside disturbances are going to disrupt everything. Just the act of leaving your home is bringing you way back up into your beta brain so that you're conversing with everybody. Your cervix is just not going to be doing what it wants to do. And there is a disruptance, a disturbance, and you have put your whole experience into the hands of an institution that is run by policy and money. And it's just the fact. So when you're at home, you retain autonomy of your experience. That's not to say there won't be a caregiver that wants to kind of direct things, but when you're in your own castle, you can be the queen, right?
Yes.
You can direct things and say this, I will have you here and I won't have you there. And I watch women use their voice way more primarily when they're at home, in terms of if somebody is in their space that they're not enjoying at the minute, they'll say, shh. They'll just shush them. When they're at a hospital, they kind of force open their eyes and look up at the person that's talking to them and kind of stick out their arm for the blood pressure monitor. And they're in this flux because their body is doing one thing, but their brain is doing a completely different thing. And our body mind is not supposed to be separate. It's supposed to be one and the same thing. So, there are implications with moving out of your home space, not just to your birthing process, but to the postpartum experience. There's a huge, huge rush of oxytocin once you birth your baby and birth the placenta. And it's the oxytocin that bonds you and your baby together. And it's also what prevents you from going down a dark road afterwards with depression. And that will often be disrupted in some way, shape, or form, whether it's by the lights or somebody touching you or the baby or putting a hat on the baby. You need to smell the pheromones that are coming off your child's head. You need to sniff it like a mother wolf. And this is all disrupted. So it disturbs the postpartum period, and that has implications. The postpartum period immediately being disrupted, it has implications in how you feel then and how you feel a lot later. And it also has implications in your relationship. So if you have a family-led birth where the person who gave you the light, whether that be your husband or your partner who you accepted this embryo with, if they are there and they are your other when you're giving birth and your foreheads are closed, or just their presence is with you, their energy, that baby is born into a solid unit, and that person who is witnessing you give birth completely freely has a respect that they would, that I honestly believe we would not have domestic abuse if everybody witnessed the birth of their child freely. And the same thing afterwards. In a family-led birth, the baby is born and the woman takes the baby and the partner is thereabouts, and they completely unfold this new scene. And that is solidifying a whole family unit. You know, I think we could really, really not complete, maybe not annihilate, but we could lessen so much domestic issues when birth is brought home and is left wild. Not to mention the children. If there are children at home that are seeing this, what lessons do they get from seeing their mother in this primal state and allowing nature to happen?
Yes. Wow. So powerful. So we're, this feels like, again, I'm really surprised how interested I am in this, given, not planning to be pregnant again. I really thinking about back to, I think we'll talk about this before we started recording, but this is actually a conversation we all need to be part of, because most of us will be, around pregnant women. If we're not planning to be pregnant again ourselves, it might be that we're going to be grandmothers, grandfathers. It's such valuable wisdom to know. And so I'm so appreciative of this whole conversation, but we do need to bring it to a close. But just one final thing that's occurring to me as we're talking now, for women who, for whatever reason, it could be they've had, a C-section the first time, or there could be some other reason why they are choosing or feel they need to go to hospital for their birth. What would you say to them? Whether that be how they can make that more wild, or ways that they could not go to hospital. What would I'm sure there is a bit of an individual case by case basis here too, but I would just love to hear you talk to that.
Okay. Well, if the scenario was that there was this previous cesarean, there's nothing to say that you can't have a vaginal birth thereafter. I would put into place ways in order for you to release your trauma from your first birth. I think that's all that's needed. And to find a caregiver who understands a previous C-section is not a reason to go back for another cesarean. But just say there was a reason to go to hospital, which happens. I attend hospital births also. Staying at home as long as possible is a huge thing, because when you get to a certain point in your labor, there's oftentimes very little way of going back, which is why you have car births and stuff, right? People driving off to the hospital and giving birth in the car or ambulance. I would stay at home as long as possible and create this womb-like surrounding. So you want to have a birth space. Basically, anything that you would have sex in. A room that you would have sex in is the place where your cervix and your body is going to open, right?
Oh, I love that. Yes.
Yeah, it's all of the same hormones are at play as they are when you're approaching an orgasm. So you need to get all the juices flowing. You need oxytocin flowing. So music and some candles and some oils and some darkness and some kissing. And Ina May Gaskin is a famous midwife who talks a lot about softening the pussy and the cervix by kissing, right? The soft lips of the mouth replicate the yoni. So staying at home allows that. When you're in a hospital, you feel a lot less able to do that stuff. More power to you if you do that, right? Stay at home as long as possible. And then you want to try and recreate that as best as you can once you get to the hospital. So you can have the husband or whoever the partner is.
What you've just said has struck me so much. It's just like, it's making me like, wow. Like what you just said about, like whatever environment you would feel, I guess, safe primarily. There's more to it than safety, but it's safe to have sex in. But of course, like most of us would not feel safe to go and have sex in a brightly lit hospital ward surrounded by people.
No.
Like, now you've put that into my head as like, that's the comparison here. That's the metaphor here. It's just like, wow, that's really hit me. That's a metaphor that needs to be used more often, because that just makes it so clear, doesn't it?
Yeah. There's a satire that you can find on YouTube, this little video, and it's really funny. I believe it's Italian, but there's subtitles, and it's called Sex Like Birth, or if sex were like birth. And it's funny, but it really paints a very clear picture. And it goes to show the superiority complex of the medical system often, when they will sweep in and be the savior of the day and ta-da, here I am with your epidural. And then afterwards, how women are like, oh my God, I couldn't have done it without them. And I'm like, you could, but you don't want to trigger the shit out of people, excuse my language. So you don't necessarily say that, but it's the truth. You could have done it, and there's no reason to feel ashamed around this now. It's a programming. We're programmed to think that we cannot do this. Right?
Yeah.
I forget where we were before we went.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying, okay. I was just struck by what, like, the simplicity, but also the depth of what you said around that comparison, that I just had to interrupt you to go, wow. But that is like, everything's there. But so you were saying, create that like nest, that environment at home. And then I think you were just about to say, and then when you do transition to hospital, and I think I interrupted you at that point. So carry on from there.
And like as a birth worker, as a doula, I mean, I know it sounds like I would always say have a doula. Actually, no, to the contrary, I don't. I've never even had a doula for myself, but I do think in hospital situations, it's really important to have somebody who's knowledgeable in the ways of the hospital workings, so that when you are in these deep states and your partner is going there with you, because they enter these deeper states with you. When you're posed with choices and questions, you're not having to think about what that means. There is somebody that's filtering it through and giving you clear, so that there is always consent, because my teacher Wapio talks about consent through fear and consent through compliance and love. Sometimes we are compliant through love, which means we're not scared into saying yes, but somebody is making it seem like they love us so much that we have to say yes. Right? So you don't have to do this, love. But if it were me, because I care so much about you, I would do this. And that's compliancy through love. And it's just as dangerous, because we're in our child again in that space. We're not in our full autonomous mother. So have somebody with you. And if it isn't a doula, have somebody that knows your wishes well and who you would trust to be a guardian of that space. I think it's imperative. We're walking into these hospitals blind a lot of the time.
Yeah. It's really interesting, actually, because again, very probably naively, I've not really thought about this much for years, but I suppose I'd associated someone having a doula with someone who is more likely to have a home birth, more interested in having kind of more natural wild experience. But actually what you're saying is there's probably even more reason to have a doula if you're having a hospital birth.
Absolutely.
I've never seen that before.
100%. To me, a doula is there to be a guardian and a guide of the space and to be a witness. When I'm at hospital births, sometimes I have to pull tools out of my kit, homeopathy or a rebozo. I'll talk to you about that another time, or all of these things. But a lot of the time what I'm being is a very safe space. I'm containing a safe space and allowing that mother to labor down. In a hospital, the work is different. It's very much about keeping eyes and ears out all the time and being able to relate to who it is that I'm working with, what's going on. A lot, there's chaos that goes on there, right? And I also really want to bring the point to the table that I'm not trying to demonize anybody. These people that work at hospitals are very often compassionate, but they're seeing birth in and out managed all day. That they're looking, you're trained at a hospital to look for problems. And if you look for problems enough, they will arise. So it's not to demonize them. It's to say that they are looking at birth through a very different lens to what I am and to what it is. It's not an emergent situation.
It's a system that they're doing the best within in their own, perfectly compassionate, responsible way. It's that system that you're may not choose into knowingly. Yeah. If you kind of, everything you'll talk about here, is it a system that you want to be part of or not really, isn't it?
Yeah. Things will start to change around birth when we start unpacking the reasons why we're afraid of it. So that goes with the work that you can do in pregnancy, which would take a long time to go into, so we won't. But people are afraid to go into trauma when they're pregnant. I think it's a good time. Unpicking and unpacking will get you to a base point where you don't have to be afraid of it anymore. And that fear might not be yours. It might be coming in from the stories around you or from the womb memory that you have, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's kind of, you think, again, I think it goes to that kind of cotton wool sort of way that we hold pregnancy, almost like, why on earth would you do like deep work? Why on earth would you kind of like look at your trauma in pregnancy? But what I'm hearing you say is like, no, that's actually the best time.
Yeah, and we're so divinely connected from an energetic perspective. We're so divinely connected when we're pregnant that you'll probably get your answers quite succinctly, right?
Yeah. Wow. Oh, I love that. So we, this again has just been way more fascinating than I ever expected. I had every trust in you. I was more just thinking, it's not that relevant to me, but I've actually been just like so interested in all of this. But we do need to close. Is there anything that you would like to leave listeners with, that is something that we just not touched on, or you just really want to kind of leave them with that, this is if there's anything you remember, it's this, or want to be inspired by this?
Okay, so you are the queen of your experience. You get to hire, you get to fire. first and foremost. But I want to say something to the world and the realm of blood. I think that we are people that are afraid of blood. And I think that we are raising little boys not to see it, so that they turn into daddies who are afraid of it in birth. If you're a bleeding woman, can you start to introduce the idea that blood is not death, that actually it means life, so that we can start to change the conversation around what it is to bleed and what it is to see it as when it comes out of a woman, when it emerges from a woman. We just need to start unpacking the fear. And a lot of it stems with blood.
Yes. Oh, wow. I love that. And that's a really, I think no matter what stage of womanhood you are, that's such a powerful message, because I'm guessing when you're saying that, that's blood of all kinds. I'm very open about my menstrual blood in front of both my children, my son included. And is that what you're saying? Even allowing my son to be kind of not part of that process, but a witness to that and see this, something wonderful, actually.
Yeah.
That has value.
For sure. Birth is a big old shame game. There's shame coming at it from every single angle and pouring out of every single pore and cervix. And the more that we disassociate from shame around our menstrual cycle, which is the source of it all, right? Yeah. It's the source of us all and the source of all of what we've been talking about. It's just one way that we can start to unravel shame and fear, which are bound up in one thing. And I do really think that birth is going to start to change. And it's the basis of rewilding, or coming back to our base nature, our radical root nature. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Sian. This has just been gorgeous. Really, I'm so excited for my friend Emma to listen to this. But really, really been gorgeous. Thank you. If people want to find out more about you, the work you do, and all your amazing words of wisdom, where's the best place to find you?
Nowadays, I would say that social media is probably the best place. So you can follow, I have two businesses actually. I have the birth business, which is at Seed Holistic Birth on Instagram. And I also have a business called The Enchantress as well. And that is moving more into our divine feminine witchy nature outside of childbearing years. So we work around astrology, around the moon cycles, around ritual and ceremony, around the Celtic wheel of the year. And I'm running a retreat in Avalon in Somerset, Glastonbury, over the summer solstice this year. And there are a few spaces left, with mostly Canadians coming over. But if anybody over there wants to come, it's going to be such a deep dive into ceremony of the great mother creator. So you can find the Enchantress as well at the Enchantress Well on Instagram.
Gorgeous name as well. I love that.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And I've been loving the things you've been sharing. So really recommend people go check you out, pregnant or not. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sian. Really have appreciated this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Oh, wow. What a gorgeous show. I really wasn't expecting to get so much out of it myself. Here are my takeaways. Rewilding pregnancy means connecting to the land, for example, via plant medicine, and connecting to our inner wisdom and to spirit. It's a time when the veils are thin and we are more sensitive and connected to the divine. As a culture, we'd be served by losing our fear of blood, allowing our boys to witness the magic and power of blood so they don't relate it to death. Trust your own wisdom and sovereignty, and hire and fire people to serve you in pregnancy and birth as you desire. Invoke the power of ceremony and ritual to support you letting go of the maiden, or of being the mother of however many children you already have, and stepping wholeheartedly into the mother or the next stage of motherhood for you. If you'd like to get the notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, including the resources that Sian mentioned, do hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 267. If you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice, and hit that subscribe button. That way, magically, you're going to get each episode straight to your device as soon as it comes out. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.